Adams did him in before he could show us his true colors. Not that whatever happens next is going to go any better for us. A couple weeks later, property owner and washed-up actor AJ arrives at the house to put it up for sale. Yeah, good luck with that. Have you seen the state of this neighborhood? Not to mention the fact that it looks like the last tenants have yet to check out. God, dude's worse than Tess and Keith combined. The key box has been wide open for who knows how long, and he's got no problem clonking out in the bedroom beside a bunch of someone else's crap. You'd think he'd at least be somewhat concerned that whoever's stuff this is might show up in the middle of the night to make him stick himself. Yeah, don't worry though, his decision making only goes downhill from here. The next morning, while enjoying his cup of coffee, AJ hears something moving around in the basement, prompting him to arm up with a steak knife and head downstairs to handle business. Might want to rethink that weapon choice there. As long as this place has been wide open, you could very well be walking in on a full-blown hippie drum circle. But instead of hippies, it's Skinny Pete and the boys. And instead of playing the drums, they're whipping up a batch. However, by the time he works up the courage to investigate, whoever or whatever was making the noise is nowhere to be found. Probably for the best. Dude looks like he can barely bend over and pick up his shorts. Just then, AJ notices the secret string protruding from the wall. At this point, I'm not even gonna waste my breath on the 1,000,001 reasons why poking around a DIY mine shaft on your dilapidated rental property is a bad idea. We all know Freddy's going in to investigate. Thankfully, upon discovering the little casting couch setup they got going on down there, he reacts like any reasonable person would.
Can underground rooms be this square footage? Oh, yeah.
Jackpot. All that extra space is definitely going to reel in those first-time buyers. After learning about the sudden spike in property value, AJ grabs a tape measure and heads back down to tally up his gains, only to discover this second doorway leading deeper into the underground network. So let me get this straight. You just heard something rustling down there, like 5 minutes ago, and your first reaction upon finding a dark, spooky tunnel leading to God knows where is to go backpedaling into the unknown with nothing but a flimsy piece of dinnerware and a dollar store flashlight. I know celebrities are supposed to be out of touch with reality and all, but I'm starting to wonder if there isn't a monoxide leak in this place. Eventually, he comes to some kind of nightmare nursery room with Motherhood for Mutants playing on a small TV set. Well, this just won't do. What are you, just gonna let a bunch of mole people steal your electricity like this? Time to whip out old Sticky and show them who's boss. Suddenly, the tape measure starts paying out uncontrollably back towards the entrance, prompting the unflappable AJ to fumble his way into battle position. I'm guessing he wasn't an action star. Hearing something big wheezing its way around the bend, he decides to reconsider his choice of choke points, instead running aimlessly deeper into the complex. Not a whole lot I can say for him at this point. He really shouldn't have gone down there without some kind of heavily armed assault team. At the very least, I would have tried calling up Zach Baggins and company to tell them the place is haunted. Let them get gobbled up mapping it out. One thing's for sure, we'd better keep a tight grip on our flashlight. If we lose visibility down here with something chasing us, we might as well just swallow that steak knife and get it over with. And he dropped it. Great going, Butterfingers. Better technomance that thing back to life ASAP. Think I hear something coming. Jesus Christ. On second thought, keep it off. Look, I know seeing Lady Dimitrescu without her makeup on is frightening and all, but you should probably stay focused on the ground in front of you, so you don't break your leg tripping over something, or fall into a giant prison pit. Oh, well, at least he won't have to worry about dying alone, because it turns out he's got a cellie in the form of a very emaciated Tess. Holy sh**, she's alive? I thought for sure Biggin would have cracked her open on the wall like she did Key. Right off the bat, she tells him to calm down, lest he incur the wrath of their feral ghoul hostess. Easier said than done, I know, but given she's managed to survive down here for over a week, I'd say we should probably do whatever she says. Just then, the terror returns to check on our captives. Evidently, it's feeding time, although something tells me that didn't come from Whole Foods. However, when baby won't latch, Big Mama scoops him back up to the nursery to feed him straight from the source. You know, a lot of weirdos out there would probably pay good money for this action. Fortunately, in the monster mother's haste to ensure AJ grows up big and strong, she forgot to close the grate covering the hole, giving Tess a chance to make a break for it. Grabbing the knife and flashlight, she manages to sneak by unnoticed. That is, until she stumbles onto the uncoiled measuring tape lying near the exit. With her beastly babysitter hot on her heels, Tess makes it back to the basement and begins chipping away at the window with the steak knife, narrowly avoiding recapture after getting a helping hand from the same guy that once scared her half to death. Evidently, he was just trying trying to warn her to not go into the house. But dude, come on. Your delivery does need some cleaning up.
Hey, little girl! Hey, little girl! Come out that house!
Gee, I wonder why she didn't listen to you. Maybe next time try starting with something a little less unhinged, like don't go in there. There's a baby-crazed giantess living in the basement that'll snatch you up like a Cabbage Patch Kid. The homeless hero tries bringing her back to his camp in the nearby water tower, warning her that the creeper will almost certainly come looking for her as soon as the sun goes down. But Tess insists they have to find a way to help the newcomer still trapped inside. With her savior unwilling to help any further, she makes her way alone through the battered block to a gas station and calls the cops. Boy, can't wait to see how this goes. How many calls do you think they get a day from people in her condition screaming about creatures hiding underground? Apparently, it's a lot because the responding officers can barely be bothered to exit their cruiser upon arriving at the house. The way they see it, the only crime being committed here is some lunatic trying to break in through the basement window.
Are you mother bleeding?
Hey, I've had enough of you. You're lucky we don't bring you downtown to sleep this off in jail.
Yes, must be that new junk on the street that makes people speak clearly and articulately in complete sentences. Jokes aside, I can hardly blame the boys in blue for not immediately breaking the door down without a warrant based on the testimony of someone that looks like she's been riding the lightning in a big old tire the last week and a half. If I were Tess, I'd tell them to run the plates on my Jeep parked out front. As long as it's registered to us, we can then provide her matching name and address to show them we aren't just some local needle enthusiast out for her nightly freakout. Not sure it'll be enough to have them search the place outright, but it could at least convince them to look into it a little more. That said, after spending days on end living in a literal hole in the ground, even a concrete floor in a jail cell would probably feel like memory foam. Sure, it won't do our friend any favors, but it might not be the worst idea to let them take us in. Besides, it's gonna be dark soon. Back underground, AJ took advantage of Tess's escape to give his wet nurse the slip. Using his phone light, he makes his way through the darkened corridors to yet another door, just in time for the nanny to track him down. However, instead of dragging him off to the nursery for another bout with the biddies, she stops dead in her tracks at the side of the door and slowly slinks off into the darkness. I'm gonna go ahead and say that's a red flag. Whatever she's afraid of sure as was not the threat of late career Justin Long backed into a corner. My guess is this door leads to something that'll make this hag look like a Girl Scout. Although it's not like we can just curl up in the hallway for the rest of our lives. AJ opens the door to find a subterranean apartment belonging to the home's previous owner, and by the looks of it, he's seen better days. Now, why would a 7-foot-tall vampire mommy be scared of a shriveled old crone rotting away in the pool of his own fluids? Must be the smell, or maybe it has something to do with that huge collection of VHS tapes including such classics as Jane, Screamer, Won't Stop Crying, and Bad Nose Bleeder. Should probably keep her eyes on this sicko's hands in case he doesn't take the eviction well. Remembering the camcorder upstairs, AJ puts two and two together and pops in one of the tapes, and what he sees on the screen makes him want to pull the plug on this geezer. However, while the escapee was busy taking in the horse show, evil grandpa managed to fish his snub nose out of the nightstand, only it doesn't look like he's got home defense on the brain.
No, wait!
Good riddance. Not sure why you'd try to stop him, especially considering the alternative. Besides, you're done. Probably make sure the rest of the cylinders are loaded, just in case this thing was a self-delete special. Couldn't hurt to check for any more ammunition lying around either. After all, I got a feeling Big Bertha could soak up some lead. Meanwhile, back upstairs, Tess has finally decided to break in and go after her car keys. But instead of immediately whipping a Yui and putting this mess in the rear view, she turns her Jeep back towards her would-be prison, just in time to say goodbye to the warden. Yeah, I get wanting to ice this freak show after she forced you into playing house with her for 2 weeks. But now your car's f***ed up. Giant monsters or not, this is hardly the kind of place you want to be walking around at night. At the very least, we should grab the tire iron and dish out the double tap to make sure we don't run into any surprises on our way out. With Mother of the Year down for the count, Tess heads back underground to find her former cellmate, but her flashlight dies along the way. Just then, she sees the faint glow of a cell phone approaching from farther down and calls out to it. Only, the response is probably not what she was hoping for.
Hello?
Didn't anyone ever tell you that spelunking is dangerous?
Fortunately, AJ flinched hard enough to pull the shot low left, although not enough to keep toasting her right in the gizzard. Probably worth mentioning, you should never open fire until you can see what you're aiming at. But given most of Tess's body was lit up from the nursery, I'm thinking this legitimately just tried to kill her. Either way, at least he has the decency to carry her out of this dump. Upon reaching the street level, the two exit the house to find Mary Poppins has disappeared. To make matters worse, AJ left his car keys back in the tunnel. With nowhere left to turn, our heroes limp their way to the water tower to drop in on the hobo for a good old-fashioned exposition dump. I'm sure everyone's just dying to know what the whole Nurse Lurch crawled out of. But why the hell haven't you used that cell phone you were carrying around to call a freaking ambulance? What are you, out of minutes or something? If Tess doesn't get medical attention soon, she's almost certainly gonna bleed to death. But no, it's fine. According to Bum MD's expert diagnosis, she's totally fine to hunker down in this heap until morning. Better stick a thumb in it, lady. It's gonna be a long night, especially with Mr. Long digging deep to earn that Oscar.
You're a bad person. Maybe I'm a good person. You just did a bad thing.
Or maybe you're a moron. That would certainly explain why you're monologuing beside an open fire with Mother of the Year screwing around just up the street, which, if I had to guess, is probably why she's about to come busting in like a Kool-Aid man to speech her host to death with his own arm. Oh, and judging by the way you left the injured woman to be savagely torn apart by old Tabitha, I'm definitely leaning towards you being a bad person. Unfortunately, the only way out proves to be a dead end, forcing them to climb up one of the nearby water tanks, which is also a dead end. But at least AJ will have a chance to dome slice this bee when she reaches the top, provided he can whip the piece out without neutering himself, or dropping it over the side. Christ, dude, maybe popcorn was a bad choice. However, the sight of their one saving grace flattering onto the staircase below gives brave Sir Robin an idea. Miss Underverse is only chastening to get her baby back, so let's just see how far she's willing to go. And with that, AJ heroically grabs Tess by the hair and yeets her over the side of the tower.
Come get your baby!
Bro, cold as ice. I wouldn't even do something like that. Probably. As Tess plummets to the earth, the last thing she sees before hitting the ground is her surrogate mother following her right behind her. However, since the law of physics works differently in the state of Michigan, Trollface falls fast enough to beat her to the ground and soak up most of the impact. I don't care if all that's left of her looks like strawberry milkshake. Find one of the larger chunks to dump the last 4 rounds of 357 in before she pulls herself together and tears out your spine. Unfortunately, before he can administer the coup de grace, the sight of Tess coming back to life stops him dead in his tracks, giving She-Hulk an opportunity to peel herself off the pavement and rip his head in half like a phone book. Let that be a lesson in shooting first and asking questions later. With the friendly foe neutralized, Mrs. Frankenstein leans over to comfort her ailing child. But little does she realize, she's completely insane. This is not her daughter, and she's about to get shot in the head. And with that, Tess is finally free from this nightmare. Although, it might be worth it to Independence Day this creep show to the nearest cop shop, because there is absolutely no way anyone's going to believe your story otherwise. Look on the bright side. Just think about the book deal you're going to get out of this. In the end, only Tess was able to make it out alive. However, had any one of them actually had half a brain in their skull, they would have known not to go poking around the creepy underground tunnel, thus never having run afoul of Slothette in the first place. For that reason, I think Barbarian was beaten. Moral of the story, stay the hell away from Detroit. Gamer subs nerds, new flavor just dropped and it's something you never
And I think people are making fun of it, and I think they're going to be proven horrifically wrong. Not horrifically, I mean, who cares?
Come from the future, yes, the future.
Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Brain Blaze. Hi, as ever, I'm your revered host. Welcome to the show. Today, the biggest financial losses in history. Oh, I remember this one. I just got back from a week's holiday, so I definitely pitched all of these ideas like 3 weeks ago, whatever, and I'm now just getting caught up. I got so many to record. But this was one where it's like Elon Musk was the first man ever to lose $200 billion. It's like, fucking hell. That is so much money. It's incomprehensibly large. I'm sure if it was just in $100 bills, it would probably fill up this entire room. And this is a large room. The space you can see behind me is maybe 3-4 meters, no more than that, 5 meters away from me. And this is a third, a quarter of the room. That's a lot of money. I bet it wouldn't all fit in here. It probably wouldn't fit in an entire office space. Crazy. Fascinating tangent, Simon. Let's carry on. Let's just get on with it, shall we? When you apply online to potentially break a new Guinness World Record, you're greeted with the encouraging words, do you want to set a world record? Are you officially amazing? I know this because my own recent application to break the world record for the most doner kebabs consumed in 24 hours was swiftly rejected for nanny state health reasons. You could do it, Daddy. How many is that? I guess if it's rejected, then we never know. I reckon you could eat 50, Danny. Is that insane? That's an insane number, isn't it? Depends how big they are.
Step back, I think I'm gonna vomit!
That'd be one every half hour for 24 hours. No, you couldn't do that. That'd be insane. That'd be like 100 and something thousand calories, right? What, they gotta be like... How many did I say? 50? They're not gonna be 2,000 calories each. Let's say they're 1,000 calories each. That's a lot of calories. Oh my god, I don't think you could do that without dying. But it strikes me that there are some Guinness World Records you really don't want to break. I know that certain legendary figures must take great pride in breaking records for the fastest man on earth, longest wheelchair ramp jump, and to push biggest collection of hamburger memorabilia. Please don't tell me that's a real... This is the thing with Guinness World Records. It's a company. It's not like some governmental body which officially decides records. If you want to break the records, you got to like pay them money. They come out to you. They certified all this shit. It's like... It's just like, I don't know, I personally think it's a bit of nonsense.
What's the record run?
Other records aren't quite as prestigious, such as the world's loudest female burp, 107 decibels, the furthest distance to squirt milk from an eye socket, how is that even possible, as 9 feet and 2 inches, and the fastest London marathon competitor dressed as a vegetable. How? Why is this a thing? Why is this nonsense a thing? No one cares. Andy Shadbolt, who completed the marathon in just under 3 hours and 33 minutes. He was dressed as a carrot, by the way. But there are some records that really aren't worth the glory of getting that name check in the Guinness Book of World Records. And there are so many that the Guinness Book of World Records when I was young was like this thick. And it didn't include these nonsense ones. Or if it did, it included a few for a laugh. It was always the much more serious ones, like how many clothes pegs a man can attach to his face. I'm not convinced that I'd want to be remembered for being the fattest person in medical history, the first person to be killed by a car, or incurring the largest loss of personal fortune in history. That last record was held for a good couple of decades by Korean-Japanese billionaire investor Masayoshi Son, whose net worth plummeted by $59 billion within just a few months in 2000. It was a record held until 2023, when Elon Musk signed it up to him and said, "Hold my pint, son." I know we can't get enough of Elon Musk on Brain Blaze these days because people click on his face, don't they? And we'll return to the poor lamb's recent financial woes very shortly, but first I'd like to go back to Masayoshi Son, who might just be one of the most baffling billionaires of all time. The founder of the Japanese investment conglomerate SoftBank was... Oh, I've heard of SoftBank. Didn't they invest in that... Weren't they a huge investor in WeWork? Which that probably worked out brilliant for them. And he was briefly the richest man in the world by the late 1990s, and despite his record-breaking loss, he still holds a position on the Forbes Rich List today. Yeah, the Forbes Rich List isn't it like 500 people? If you were the world's richest man, and now you're not on the Forbes Rich List at all, I mean, dude, you screwed up big time. Like, if you're that rich, just take some money, enough to always have you on the Forbes Rich List. Let's just use that as my financial advice, not financial advice. This is obviously a joke. But just take some of that and put it in like really stable investments so you know that you'll always be super rich. Why not do that? Instead of putting like loads of money into WeWork. I have no idea if that's actually what happens. It's not, because this was ages ago. But you know what I'm saying? Take some of your money. Like, it's not like I make all this money from YouTube and then just put it all back into YouTube. I take a good chunk of it and put it into, like, safe investments rather than something that could go away at any moment. Because I don't want this to go away and then have to get a job, you know? That would suck.
Work sucks. I know.
He made what is considered by some to be the shrewdest single investment of all time, and yet he is also widely regarded as the worst investor in history. So, is he a visionary genius or a comically clueless buffoon? After moving from Japan to study in California in the 1970s at the age of 16, Masayoshi had already made his first million before he even left university. With assistance from university professors, he invented a voice-operated electronic translator, which he sold to Sharp for $1.7 million. Wait, when the fuck is this happening? 1970s. Holy shit. That sort of thing existed? He swiftly made another $1.5 million after he set up a business which imported newfangled Space Invaders machines from Japan and leased them out to dormitories and restaurants in the United States. He sounds like a bit of an epic businessman. Like, true. This is a lot of money. In the 1970s, it's got to be 10 times, right? So he made like 17 million and 16 million. So hustling that money, bro.
Yes.
Masayoshi was clearly embracing a technological future and also money, and the young students seemed destined to go far. Bro, if someone's made $17 million by the time they've barely left university, you're going to be like, that guy's got a bright future. When he first launched SoftBank in 1981, the focus was initially on software distribution, but by the 1990s, the public company had evolved into one of the leading investors in new internet firms, and Masayoshi had his fingers in just about every digital pie. At one point, SoftBank was valued at $180 billion, and the company was said to own 25% of the internet. How do you own the internet? That's weird.
How did you manage this?
I bought it with money.
Nice.
His most notable investment came in 1999 when he plowed $20 million into a new Chinese e-commerce platform which went by the name of Alibaba. Oh my god, this dude's made some coin! However, when the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, it hit Masayoshi and SoftBank pretty hard. Wait, I'm pretty sure Alibaba is still absolutely massive, largely because the company had been generously throwing around massive investments into anything that sounded vaguely techy, including no less than 800 startup ventures, nearly all of which crashed. In February 2000, Masayoshi's net worth had reached a peak of $78 billion. Just a few months later, the plummeting SoftBank shares had wiped off a staggering $58.6 billion from that value. But it certainly wasn't the end of Masayoshi or his unorthodox approach to investing. Masayoshi always insisted on meeting potential investors face to face, and he seemed to be more interested in the look of determination in their eyes rather than a solid business plan. I mean, we want to laugh at this, right? But this guy's got a ton of experience in business, and I'm a true believer in that idea of chunked knowledge. Is it in that Thinking Fast and Slow book where it's like you have so much experience in something that you know the right answer even though you're not really on a conscious level aware of it. This kind of process happens in the subconscious, and I don't think he's looking in their eyes. He's like hearing them talk about it, and he's sensing it. And I think like when you have a ton of experience in anything, that's incredibly valuable, and it kind of is, it's not just about the look in their eyes, it's about everything else that your subconscious brain is processing. I think that's probably what's going on. I think it's pretty legit, to be honest.
You can't sense power levels without some sort of device. Afraid you're wrong. You're bluffing.
He would insist on offering up far more money than the company had asked for, but only on the condition that they speed up their ideas and rapidly accelerate their growth. Again, this seems pretty good. I mean, again, it's not something that you want to put your entire fortune into, but it definitely seems like something that a good amount of money, like, I don't know, if I don't know, I just invest in like boring ass like index funds and EFTs, but I don't know, I'd definitely like be interested in doing something like that. And then like with a small amount of money, I guess they need like millions. So never mind. But I totally get the appeal of this, but I get the feeling this guy's gonna like, what's gonna catch him is he does this way too much, right? This didn't go down well with everyone, but the offer was often made alongside a threat that if the company walked away from the deal, Masayoshi would instead pump substantial wealth into their closest rival. Holy shit, dude. I mean, that's a douchebag move, allegedly, but also pretty big brain. As an initially reluctant Dara, unpronounceable surname, CEO of Uber, Kosh... Dude, I don't know. I'm sorry. It begins with a K and it ends in an I. It's really long and it's got row in them. Moving on. Rather than having their capital cannon facing me, I'd rather have their capital cannon behind me. Although Masayoshi has often been accused of pissing away far too much money on overvalued assets, he seemed to be an advocate of the greater fool theory, which suggests that no matter how much you overspend during a market bubble, there's always a bigger fool waiting in the wings to buy from you at an even higher price, which is great until you're no longer in a market bubble anymore, and basically no one can predict that. The problem is that the vast majority of Masayoshi's investments over the years have been absolute disasters, and you can be forgiven for thinking that he hasn't got the foggiest clue what he's doing. One of the most famous examples was the hefty investment in WeWork. There we go. The valuation of which... God damn, I already read it. It's like, I can see it, the light ahead on the teleprompter. I've forgotten how brutal it was. Fell from $47 billion to just $3 billion over the course of a year, and led to SoftBank losing the majority of its $10 billion investment. And this wasn't an isolated case. In 2022, SoftBank recorded a total loss of $23 billion in the second quarter. Fuck me! That's in a quarter. If that trended, that'd be $100 billion a year. Oh, I just did something wrong and my teleprompter reset to the start of the script. So let's just start again. When you apply online, oh no, and now it skipped to the end. Teleprompter, what are you doing? Why are you like this? And now it's so slow. This is the pedal that I use. It's like a music pedal. And I use this so much that I go through about one of these a year because eventually these little pedals here get broken off. It looks like some Chinese 3D printed crap, to be honest, but it's literally the only one that I could find.
A few moments later.
Fixed it! Even Masayoshi is starting to get a bit sheepish about the state of things and has recently promised to curb the random investments. Bro, if you're calling them random investments, and that is in quotes, so I assume he is, don't be calling your investments random. It makes you sound like a gambler, which he feels were based on his increasing delirium. Oh my, don't say that, bro. But how did his company manage to survive for so long when everything Masayoshi touches turns to shit? Well, it's nearly all down to the 1999 investment in Alibaba. That small Chinese startup evolved into one of the biggest retailers in the world, and Masayoshi's relatively trivial $20 million stake was worth about $180 billion by the year 2018. Masayoshi's scattergun approach to investment yielded a single lucky strike, which has been effectively keeping SoftBank afloat amidst all the other terrible losses. However, the future looks uncertain as Masayoshi has recently resorted to selling off billions of dollars worth of his Golden Goose stock in order to raise desperately needed cash following a year which was abysmal by even his own low standards. To be fair, the alleged world's worst investor in history has hardly been short of a bob or two for the last few decades. Make up your minds about whether Masayoshi-san is an unfathomable genius or a laughingstock gambler. It's a gigantic fluke, but whose luck is finally on the brink of running out. Honestly, it sounds like a bit of both, doesn't it? It's like he's made one good investment and he had to make that good investment. It's not like he just bought a lottery ticket. He did something right, and he was also pretty damn big brain when he was back at university with those like $1 million sales and the translating thing. So I think it's probably somewhere in between. The Mars Climate Orbiter. Oh, we can be perhaps a little more forgiving when an agency like NASA ends up wasting a massive amount of money on something that goes completely tits up. When it comes to the tricky matter of space exploration, it may not be brain surgery, but it is something very close, and there's going to be plenty of scope for trial and error and random explosions in the ongoing quest to go where no one has gone before and do things that no one has done before. But perhaps one of NASA's most notorious examples of pissing away good money had nothing to do with the unpredictability of pioneering new technology. It was a simple matter of internal miscommunication, which ended up seeing around $327 million getting lost in space.
Where the f*** am I?
The Mars Climate Orbiter was launched in December 1998 on a 669 million kilometer mission to study the Martian climate and atmosphere and transmit data for an upcoming Mars Polar Lander mission. Is this the one where someone was using like metric and someone was using imperial? And it just caused it to like fly off into space. $300 million worth of equipment back in the day, which is more today because of inflation. Its current whereabouts are unknown. All contact with the robotic space probe was immediately lost after it ended orbital insertion on a doomed trajectory that brought it way too close to Mars. It's possible that the climate orbiter may have pulled free of the planet's vicinity and entered an orbit around the sun, or it could have just gotten frazzled to bits in the atmosphere. But the reason why the trajectory got so celestially fudged in the first place is because nobody could agree on what units of measurement should be used for the output of of the ground-based software. NASA has long stipulated the mandatory use of the metric system in their own software interface specifications, like the big brains they are. But it seems that nobody told this to the propulsion engineer contractors Lockheed Martin, who preferred to use US customary units. So whilst the trajectory calculations were expected to be delivered in NASA's format of Newton seconds, they were actually delivered in Lockheed Martin's preferred format of pound-for seconds, which ultimately sent the whole project plunging into a massive financial black hole. Around $193 million was lost on the spacecraft development, with a further $91 million lost on the launch and $42 million lost on updating botched plans for the later Mars Polar Lander mission. Oh my lord. It's great. This is just such huge sums of money. And I know it's not the billions like the previous financial guy, but that just feels like electronic money moving about. This was like real money that was spent on it and then just lost. This was all quite cheap by NASA standards, and indeed critics have noted that NASA employees were pushed too hard and too fast for time under the new corporate mantra of better, faster, cheaper. NASA was certainly happy to take full responsibility for the interstellar cock-up instead of throwing Lockheed Martin under a rocket, and it was later revealed that the engineers at Lockheed Martin received their initial code from NASA in the wrong units of measurement in the first place. Well, NASA owned up to it because it was their mistake. It just seems that nobody was bothering to check any of this trivial stuff. But let's be positive about this for a Newton second. If nothing else, this monumental blunder has given teachers all over the world an opportunity to illustrate to students why it's so critically important to double check your units and conversions. So it's not like it was a total waste of $327 million, is it? Kinda is, though. Here comes Elon. Although Masayoshi Son's net worth loss of around $59 billion might be considered a tad unfortunate, Elon Musk's recent record-breaking loss of a reported $182 billion might well be considered downright careless. The founder of SpaceX, CEO and product architect of the electric vehicle company Tesla, and current chief twit, I think he removed that from his bio, didn't he? Although I did mute him because since he bought the company, it's like, did he change it to put himself more in the homepage, or is it just because he's on the news more? It wasn't mute, it was like, just I'm not interested in this. Like all the adverts for f***ing scammy cryptocurrency that Twitter seems littered with. He enjoyed a meteoric rise in wealth over the last couple of years, but in January 2023, he was reported to have finally knocked Masayoshi off his perch as Guinness World Record holder for the largest loss of personal fortune in history. But can this dramatic fall in fortunes really be pinned entirely on his controversial sidestep into the Twitter sphere? It's partly that, isn't it? Also partly because just Tesla's not delivering the number of vehicles that they wanted to do, or something like that. Elon first became a billionaire in 2012. And he had it's crazy how fast his rise came. That's 11 years ago. And he was the richest person in the world who's ever lived, by far. And he had a net worth of around $27 billion by the time we hit 2020. But it's only over the course of the last couple of years that Elon's net worth soared to incredible new heights, resulting in possibly the fastest wealth creation that the world has ever seen. By the end of 2021, Elon had overtaken Jeff Bezos as the richest person in the world and become the first person in history to be worth over $300 billion. Of course, it's not like Elon ever had that money to play with in the bank. His net worth is determined by the ever-shifting market valuations of the companies in which he holds a massive stake. In Elon's case, his sudden spike in wealth was largely self-driven by the ownership of 20% of Tesla stock, which surged by a staggering 743% over the course of 2020 and a further 50% in 2021. Which, when this was happening, I don't know, I never put any money into Tesla because I'm like, like, Tesla delivers some cars, and I've driven Teslas. They're not that good. They feel like Teslas, for me, the way I would sum up a Tesla is it has the price of a luxury vehicle, but it feels like a relatively good VW. It doesn't feel like a Mercedes or a BMW. It certainly doesn't feel... It just doesn't feel luxurious. And for the price that you're paying, it should. And also, when it was said that they're worth, like, Tesla's worth more than all of the other major automotive players combined or some absurd stat like that, I was like, oh, it's obviously not. Is it? What would Warren Buffett say? He's the value-based investing guy, right? Who actually cares about what companies are worth. That might seem impulsive, but Elon has often described himself as cash poor. I mean, I'm sure he can afford a half-decent watch that is almost as nice as Simon's, and he will have no qualms about enjoying shredded wheat for breakfast. But it's not like he's got billions of dollars stashed away in a secret drawer. His vast wealth is tied up in those fluctuating share prices, and whenever he fancies buying himself something really nice, say for example Twitter, he usually has to take out some big loans against those very same shares. This is just because if he sells He takes out the loans against the shares because if he sells the shares, the price of the shares is going to, like, if he sold 20% of Tesla, that's going to tank the value of Tesla, right? Because people are like, why is he selling all the shares? Even if it's to buy Twitter, it feels risky. And so other people will sell their shares and the value of the company will drop. I don't know enough about finance, but that's what it is, right? And there's also, if he sells the shares, he's going to have to pay, like, capital gains on it, right? Which is going to take away a huge chunk of money, which if he gets a loan, he doesn't... I don't know. There's plenty of finance channels that will tell you how that works. I've probably watched the videos, but then I forgot. Although Forbes reckoned his net worth had fallen from a peak of 340 billion to a paltry peasant's 137 billion. $1 billion in the space of a couple of months, other experts reckon that the real loss will exceed well over $200 billion. Much of the blame for this has been thrown on Elon's well-publicized takeover of Twitter. The actual reason is the sudden plummeting share price of Tesla, which had fallen by 73% during 2022. It's true that the blue bird may have at least played a part in pecking away at Elon's net worth, though Tesla's share price took a notable hit in the immediate aftermath of the $44 billion acquisition, a situation accelerated by the fact that Elon had been selling off his lucrative Tesla stocks in order to fund the Twitter deal. He sold a total of almost $23 billion worth of Tesla stock in 2022, including a final batch of nearly $4 billion, which he sold after promising investors that he wouldn't be flogging any more in the near future. Bro, I feel like, aren't you already in enough trouble with various regulators? I don't know if that's illegal, but that feels real dodgy. Like, people don't have faith in you, and you are like Tesla. You are SpaceX.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You are now Twitter. And if people don't have faith in you, they're not going to have faith in those companies, which is a huge issue. And I think the problem with Elon Musk is he's lost a lot of faith. Like, I used to think Tesla was cool, then I didn't really think it was cool. Still thought Elon Musk was cool. Still think SpaceX is cool, and I think Elon Musk is doing a lot of good stuff. But my admiration and my enjoyment of Elon Musk has really deteriorated a lot. I still think the guy's doing great things, don't get me wrong, but it's just gone downhill quite a lot, to be honest. As well as making a hole in Elon's own finances, the Twitter acquisition also scared off many of the biggest Tesla investors for a number of reasons. Some of them were naturally worried that the CEO, majority shareholder, was rapidly offloading all of this stock, and they were losing trust and confidence in Elon over his broken promises. Exactly. Who knew how much more stock he was going to sell to help keep Twitter afloat following the mass exodus of advertisers from his new platform? Others were concerned that the whole Twitter show had damaged the credibility of both Elon and Tesla, and that some of his more controversial decisions were making investors question his competence whilst rapidly shifting the tide of public opinion against him. Meanwhile, a big chunk of other investors felt that Elon was becoming far too distracted by the troubles of Twitter when he should be focusing his attention on keeping Tesla on the right track. Yeah, it does seem like a distraction. Elon Musk is like, we're going to make it the marketplace, the town square of the world, like Twitter. And it's like, okay, great. That seems less important than Twitter and than Tesla, and definitely less important than SpaceX, which is doing some really cool shit. It might seem irrational to conclude that Tesla would just collapse in sheer hopelessness if mighty Elon doesn't spend enough time behind the wheel, but the company itself appeared to back up this suggestion in a recent filing which noted, "We are highly dependent on the services of Elon Musk. Although Mr. Musk spends significant time with Tesla and is highly active in our management, he does not devote his full time and attention to Tesla." However, it should be the case that the Twitter controversies merely added more fuel to a long list of problems that Tesla would have been facing with or without the blue bird. The company may have dominated the electric vehicle market in the US and China for several years, but recent growing competition in both markets has piled on the pressure for Tesla, whilst an uncertain economy and COVID-related logistical problems, particularly in China, has hampered production to the point where all expectations have fallen way short. It could also be the case that Tesla's phenomenal rise on the stock market was simply a matter of investors getting a bit too carried away in the first place, and that the share price was always destined to drop to more realistic levels after everyone calmed down a bit. And I know, hindsight's 2020, I'm like, I didn't buy any Tesla shares, but I also wasn't confident enough to short any Tesla shares, although that's much more dangerous. And it's not just Elon who's experienced a tricky time in 2022. The billionaire founders of the biggest tech companies have seen a dramatic drop in their net worth following a tough year for the industry, which witnessed Jeff Bezos lose around $85 million, whilst Mark Zuckerberg lost over $100 billion. I think Mark Zuckerberg, people's thing on Facebook right now is so bad. People are like, I don't know, Facebook's kind of not doing great, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, they're just pushing so hard on that VR thing, which I'm just convinced is going to be a huge part of the future. And I think people are making fun of it, and I think they're going to be proven horrifically wrong. Not horrifically, I mean, who cares? But there's no doubt in my mind that VR in 10 years is going to be a huge thing.
I come from the future. The future. Yes, the future.
And I don't know if Facebook and the metaverse or Meta or whatever they want is going to be like a major part of that, but VR is going to be a major part of our lives. It just is. This is partly just a natural come down after the tech industry enjoyed massive gains during the COVID lockdowns when everybody else was losing their jobs and had nothing better to do than sit around in their pants all day and play Candy Crush Saga. It's worth noting that Bezos, Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk himself are still worth far more today than they were 3 years back. And it's not like Elon's lifestyle would have changed dramatically after his net worth took a battering. He's not the kind of billionaire who squanders his fortune on fancy yachts. He claims to have no interest in the material trappings of wealth, has pledged to sell almost all of his physical possessions, including his houses, and regularly sleeps on the factory floor. I feel like this is just a flavor of the month for Elon Musk, though, because he has houses, and I'm sure he has all sorts. Didn't he buy like a McLaren F1 or something when he like sold PayPal or whatever? There's the video of him getting the delivery on YouTube. So I just feel like this is the flavor of the month, and he'll come around. Like, I definitely go through phases where I'm like, oh, it's so nice to have like nice things and all that stuff, and I'm like, sometimes I'd rather live a simpler existence, and then other times I'm like, oh wait, no, nice things are nice, I forgot, you know. But he just does it on like scale 1 million. If he was to become homeless tomorrow, I don't think he'd notice much difference in his lifestyle aside from not having anybody to fire. Elon himself doesn't seem too concerned over the future after tweeting, long-term fundamentals are extremely strong. Short-term market madness is unpredictable. Some experts have suggested that Elon Musk will never again be the richest man in the world and that his reign at the top was just a temporary result of absurdly fast wealth creation, which was unsustainable. But he's still very much got his fingers in the future of electric cars and space exploration, so I wouldn't be too hasty in completely writing him off just yet. No, definitely don't write Elon Musk off. He's quite smart. The problem with these vaguely topical brain blaze videos is there's always the risk of
Hey, 42 here. Lots of random odds and ends get washed up on the beach. Seashells, seaweed, empty plastic bottles, driftwood, the corpse of a Welsh tramp dressed up to look like an officer of the Royal Marines. Okay, so maybe that last one was a bit of a curveball, but that's exactly what a Spanish fisherman found near the port city of Huelva in 1943 during the Second World War. Of course, it isn't unheard of for dead soldiers to wash up on beaches in times of war, but this was no ordinary corpse. And, in discovering it, the unwitting fisherman triggered the first step in a carefully orchestrated chain of events devised by the British Secret Service to fool Adolf Hitler into making a catastrophic tactical blunder. You see, by this point in the war, the tide was already beginning to turn in favor of the Allies. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 had convinced the United States to make a timely appearance on the global battlefield. The Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union was fast turning into an unmitigated disaster, and the Allies had just scored a resounding victory in the North African campaign. But for all this success, by early 1943, the Nazis and their Axis allies still controlled most of Europe, something that was going to need to be rectified if the war was to be won. Luckily, with the North African campaign concluded, the Allies suddenly had huge numbers of troops in need of a new assignment. The only question was, what were they going to do with them? Victory in Africa had opened up a whole new angle of attack against the Axis powers, and the Allies planned to use it. There were two possible targets: Sicily, which would give the Allies a foothold in Italy and clear important shipping lanes in the Mediterranean, or Greece, allowing for a pincer movement, pressing the Germans up against the Soviets on the Eastern Front. Both options had their merits, but as far as the Allies were concerned, only one really made sense: invading Sicily. Unfortunately, Sicily was such a juicy target, hanging there like a big, ripe, strategically important plum at the end of Italy's big toe. The Axis powers were bound to anticipate the attack and concentrate their defences accordingly. Which brings me back to our recently deceased Welsh tramp, who also happened to be the key to Operation Mincemeat, a stroke of tactical deception so ridiculous and bizarre, the fact it actually worked surprised everyone, not least the people who devised it. The aim of Operation Mincemeat was simple: convince Hitler, as well as fellow fascism enthusiast Benito Mussolini, and all the rest of the Axis powers, that Greece, rather than Sicily, was the ultimate destination for the Allies' troops in North Africa. But how exactly do you go about fooling the sharpest minds in the Nazi party into thinking you're going to do one thing when really you're going to do the complete opposite? Easy. You find a nice fresh corpse, dress it up to look like a British Royal Marine, shove a briefcase full of fake top-secret documents into its cold, dead hands, then drop the corpse into the ocean, wait for it to get washed up and discovered by German intelligence, and finally hope they believe the fictional invasion plans you planted inside the briefcase are authentic. Okay, so maybe it's not that easy. If all of this is starting to sound like something straight out of a James Bond movie, then hey, that's very perceptive of you. Operation Mincemeat was based in part on a short document of creative military deception techniques called the Trout Memo, which was circulated by a man named Admiral John Godfrey. But whilst Godfrey took all the credit for the ideas in the Trout Memo, most historians seem to agree the document was probably written by his assistant, Ian Fleming, who, after the war, would go on to write the first Bond novel. Whilst the Trout Memo contained the central idea behind Operation Mincemeat, it didn't account for all the finer points of the plan, like where to get the body, how to create a plausible identity for a man who never existed, or how to transport a corpse all the way to Spain without being murdered by Germans. Intelligence officers Charles Chumley, yes, weirdly that is how you pronounce that, and Ewan Montague were tasked with overcoming those little challenges. And the first thing on their checklist was to obtain a corpse for the job at hand. Not only did the corpse have to be the right age and gender, but the deceased also had to have died recently, so as to be in a believable state of decomposition when discovered. Whilst plenty of young men died on a regular basis during the war, it turns out most families in mourning want their loved ones laid to rest respectfully, as opposed to dressed up in uniform and tossed into the ocean upon their tragic demise, which meant Chumley and Montague would ideally need to find a body with no known relatives. Under normal circumstances, it might have been almost impossible to find a suitable stiff in such short notice, but this was wartime, and unlike sugar, coal, and nylon, dead bodies were one of the few commodities not in short supply. So, Chumley and Montague made a few discreet inquiries, and before long, word of an appropriate body reached their ears. Before becoming a full-time corpse, that body had belonged to Glyndor Michael, a Welsh vagrant who'd tragically taken his own life by ingesting rat poison in an abandoned warehouse in King's Cross. Glyndor's body fit the bill perfectly, and with no family to notify of his death, it was soon at the disposal of the British Secret Service. Of course, obtaining a corpse was only the first step in the mincemeat plan. Before it could be dropped into Spanish waters, it needed a new identity. So, Chumley and Montague set about transforming Welsh vagrant Glyndor Michael into the fictitious Major William Martin, distinguished member of the Royal Marines. Nothing could be left to chance when attempting to deceive high-ranking Nazi officials, so their attention to detail needed to be meticulous. Even Major William Martin's name and rank were carefully chosen. He was designated the official rank of acting major, as this made him senior enough to be entrusted with top-secret documents, but not prominent enough that his name or face would be known to the Germans. The surname Martin was chosen simply because it was the most common name amongst officers of the same rank. As for him being a Royal Marine, that was more a case of convenience. Their uniforms were the easiest to obtain. Or at least that's what Chumley and Montague thought, until they encountered an unexpected uniform-related problem. As a high-ranking member of the Royal Marines, Major William Martin would be expected to be sporting a lovely pair of woolen underpants. Any other kind would raise suspicions. The Nazis may have counted some of the most evil men in history amongst their number, but apparently they really knew their underpants. Unfortunately, such luxuries as woolen drawers were in very limited supply at the time, and no one was willing to part with theirs. But this little issue was eventually solved by another recently deceased person. A college warden by the name of Herbert Fisher, whose grieving family kindly donated a pair of his old undies to the war effort. Not only did Major William Martin need to be dressed appropriately, he also needed to have a convincing backstory. These days, someone could have whipped up a Facebook page complete with embarrassing drunken photos of the Major's university days in no time at all. But back then, they had to be a bit more creative. Chumley and Montague started to curate a collection of what they like to refer to as pocket litter, personal items and trinkets that would make Major Martin feel real. Things like cigarettes, postage stamps, matches, keys, receipts, and ticket stubs. The Major was even given a fictitious fiancé called Pam, who existed in the form of 2 love letters, a receipt for a diamond engagement ring, and a rather saucy photograph. Well, at the time, Pam drank herself off of a beach towel. In reality, Pam was Jean, and Jean worked just down the corridor at MI5. Of all the fake documentation needed to bring Major Martin to life, the most important and problematic was his naval ID card. The problem was, there were no photos of Glindor Michael from his pre-rat poison days. Attempts were made to photograph the cadaver, but Michael made a terrible model. He was far too stiff. Montague pondered over this little poser for days before realizing the solution to his problem was staring him right in his face. Literally. During a meeting at MI5, he found himself sitting across from a man named Ronnie Reed, who, in Montague's own words, could have been the twin brother of Glindor Michael. So, Reed's headshot was taken, and the ID card was completed. For added authenticity, Montague then spent the next few weeks rubbing the card against his trouser leg in order to give it an authentic, worn-in look, which was all arranged for ID cards at the time. Chumley and Montague finally had everything they needed to set Operation Mincemeat into action. But, as the body was dressed and readied for transportation, the pair hit another snag, this time in the form of Major Martin's military boots. To keep the body preserved, it had been kept on ice for several months. But, as I'm sure you're aware, attempting to jam a pair of standard-issue military boots onto the feet of a frozen corpse is no mean feat. And try as they might, Chumley and Montague couldn't manage it. Luckily, this little hurdle was overcome relatively easily. The pair grabbed the nearest electrical heater, plugged it in, aimed it at the corpse's feet, and forged them out until they were just soft enough to slide the boots right into place. And you thought being a spy was glamorous. With his ID card suitably worn, a saucy photograph of his fiancée in his pocket, and his military boots laced up, Glindor Michael was now officially Major William Martin of the Royal Marines, leaving the Secret Service to turn their attention to the next stage of the plan, delivering the body into the hands of the Nazis. Spain was chosen for the drop, as it was known to be rife with German spy activity at the time, and the British knew a washed-up Royal Marine would soon have the Nazis buzzing around it like flies around, well, a dead body. But simply dropping the corpse out of a plane and into the ocean was far too risky. People tend to notice things like aeroplanes during world wars, and boats are also pretty conspicuous. This job called for something a little more covert. A submarine called the HMS Seraph. The Seraph took 10 days to complete its journey to the Spanish coastline. After a day of reconnaissance, the submarine surfaced, and the body, which had been preserved inside a specially built container, was brought up to the deck and released into the ocean. It was discovered only a few hours later. News soon reached the Nazis, who were practically salivating at the prospect of having a sneaky peek inside Major William Martin's top-secret briefcase. Official procedures dictated that the Spanish authorities should have sent the briefcase straight back to the British, and they did. But, as had been predicted, first they allowed German spies to have a gander at the goodies inside. We know this because when the Secret Service inspected the documents after their return to Britain, a single eyelash, which had been carefully placed within the folds of one of the letters, was noticeably absent. The fictitious plans had been read by the enemy. Photographs of the falsified documents ran up the Nazi command chain faster than you could do one of those salutes that would get you arrested today. And soon enough, they found their way into the hands of the Führer himself. He didn't doubt the authenticity of the plans for one moment. In fact, when Benito Mussolini tried to convince him that it seemed very likely the Allies would focus their attentions on Sicily, not Greece, Hitler simply refused to listen. And he was adamant the spies had struck gold by intercepting genuine British military plans. This blind belief in the authenticity of the documents might sound a little naive. After all, it must have occurred to someone that the documents could have been faked. But the deception went beyond just a body and a briefcase. The whole ruse was supported by a large number of pre-scripted diplomatic cables exchanged between Britain and Spain, in which the British made it clear how important it was that the briefcase be recovered and kept out of the hands of the Nazis. The real genius here was that these messages were all heavily encrypted, but the British knew the Germans had cracked their cipher. When the briefcase finally made it back to Blighty, a further series of messages was sent to report the tests had been carried out on the contents of the case, confirming they hadn't been compromised. This was a vital step, as naturally the Allies would have changed their plans if they had reason to believe the Germans had gotten wind of them. The complex deception was outrageously successful. Convinced he had gotten one over on the Allies, Hitler gave orders for an entire panzer division of some 90,000 soldiers to be deployed to a place Britain had absolutely no intention of invading, leaving the Allies free to invade Sicily with relative ease. By the time Hitler realized his mistake, it was too late. The successful invasion of Sicily held huge consequences for Hitler and his attempts at world domination. It paved the way for the Allied invasion of Italy and hastened Mussolini's fall from power. And in his desperation to regain control of the Mediterranean, Hitler called off a huge planned offensive against the Soviet Union, diverting 1/5 of the entire German army from the east to southern Europe, giving the Soviets a decisive advantage in the battle for the Eastern Front. If the tides of war had been starting to turn when Operation Mincemeat was first conceived, by the time the grand deception had actually panned out, it isn't much of a stretch to suggest the Allies were actually winning. Today, Operation Mincemeat is regarded as one of the most successful feats of deception ever pulled off in the theatre of war, the modern-day equivalent of the Trojan horse. Had the mission failed, it's possible the outcome of the war would have been very different and a lot more swastika-y. But what of the real hero of the story? Glyndor Michael, the Welsh vagrant who died twice to deceive the Nazis. A man who'd felt his own life so insignificant, he decided to end it alone in a warehouse in London. His body was buried in Spain with full military honours. For many years, his tombstone only bore the name of his fictional alter ego, the man who never was, Major William Martin. But in 1997, his real name was finally added to his resting place. The great tragedy, of course, is that Glyndor Michael will never know how he fooled Hitler and changed the course of history in the process. Thank you for watching. You can get your hands on my book, Stick a Flag in It, over on Amazon or on Audible. Links to both in the description below. Thank you. Today's video is sponsored by Call of War. Do you ever wonder, what kind of leader would I be if I was in charge of a whole country? Well, wonder no more, because with the free online PvP strategy game, Call of War, you get to choose a real country to lead during World War II. It requires you to use a variety of different units, such as tanks and planes, as well as other secret weapons, in order to build your army. You can play with the same account on both PC and mobile. It's such great fun, and the thing I love most about the game is the long-term strategy element. I'm giving my viewers a special gift. If you click on the link below, you'll get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. And you can even join my custom game by entering my custom game ID and password after you sign up using my special link in the description. I'll reveal my custom game details at the end of the video, so be sure to stick around. Hey, 42 here. On the 17th of August 1987, a frail 93-year-old man unplugged a lamp from the table in his summer house, then lifted the extension cord with his trembling, arthritic fingers and began patiently winding it around the latch of a nearby window. When he was satisfied the cord was secure, he made a loop at the other end, placed that loop around his neck, and allowed himself to slide slowly to the floor, pulling the makeshift noose tight around his neck and cutting off the air supply to his lungs. Within minutes, he was dead. If you're wondering why this ancient man had decided to take such drastic action, I can confirm it wasn't an act of erotic asphyxiation gone wrong, and neither was it an accident, although some people believe it may have been a murder made to look like a suicide. But before we get into all of that, perhaps it would be helpful if I told you exactly who this particular OAP was. Because what I've just described were the final earthly actions of a man named Rudolf Hess. Husband, father, keen gardener, avid hiker. Oh, and one-time second-in-command to a guy called Adolf Hitler. Hess was so notorious that at the time of his suicide, he was the sole inmate in a 600-cell fortress prison presided over by a cadre of guards from the UK, France, the United States, and the Soviet Union. Representatives from these countries would take it in turn to guard Hess, rotating personnel from one month to the next. For an idea of how much effort and expense went into guarding this one man, just picture the prison that houses Tai Lung in the first Kung Fu Panda film, and you're pretty much there. Almost as soon as Hess was found dead, the entire prison that held him was razed to the ground so as not to become a shrine to neo-Nazis. But before it was unceremoniously demolished, the prison was known as Spandau, and it was located in western Berlin. At the end of World War II, a series of court proceedings known as the Nuremberg trials took place to determine the fate of high-ranking Nazis. Many were sentenced to death by hanging, a handful were acquitted, but 7 of them, including Rudolf Hess, ended up serving prison sentences of varying lengths in Spandau. By the way, if the name Spandau is ringing a bell, you might be thinking of the British new wave pop group Spandau Ballet. And oddly enough, the band did indeed get its name from the prison that housed Rudolf Hess and other prominent Nazis. Specifically, the name refers to the involuntary jig danced by Spandau inmates in their death throes during execution by hanging. Lovely name for a band, that. Anyway, whilst Hess was the last of the Spandau 7 to leave the prison, and the only one that did so in a body bag, he was also the first of them to be captured. You see, unlike his fellow inmates who were rounded up at the end of the war, Hess had already been in prison in Britain for some 4 years at that point, and the story of how he ended up there is quite possibly the strangest ever to come out of the Second World War. It starts with a friendship bordering on obsession with one of the most evil men in history. It includes a secret solo flight to Scotland across war-torn Europe, and ends in one of the longest prison sentences ever served by a human being. Allow me to explain. Despite being a fierce patriot and nationalist, Rudolf Hess was actually born in Egypt and wouldn't make Germany his permanent home until the age of 14 when he went to boarding school there. He was 20 by the time the First World War broke out, and having signed up pretty much straight away, he served Germany with distinction, fighting in the First Battle of Ypres and the Battle of Verdun, during which time he earned both a bullet through his lung and an Iron Cross Second Class. The war ended when Hess was 24, and much like every other soldier, he went home and tried to build a life for himself. But one evening, in July of 1920, this unfamiliar new existence took a decisive turn. Because that night, Rudolf Hess heard Adolf Hitler speak in front of a crowd for the very first time. Hess had harbored racist views his entire life. Whilst growing up in Egypt, he'd shown contempt for everyone who wasn't white. and he believed Germany had lost the First World War thanks to a widespread conspiracy of Jews and Bolsheviks. So it was no surprise that he was drawn to Hitler like a big racist moth to a bright, bigoted flame. Hess signed up to the Nazi Party that very same night. From that point on, he was rarely found far from the future Führer's side. He acted as Hitler's muscle at rallies, where clashes of ideology frequently escalated into exchanges of punches, and helped out with fundraising for the party, along with pretty much anything else that needed doing. When Hitler attempted to seize control, first of Munich and then the German national government, during what is now known as the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923, Hess was once again by his side. The coup failed, and both Hitler and Hess were sent to prison for 5 years. But even behind bars, Hess managed to keep himself useful to the man he saw as the future of his nation, scribing and editing for Hitler as he dictated what would become the foundation of the Nazi Party manifesto, Mein Kampf. To say Hess was at the center of the Nazi Party during these formative years would be akin to claiming heroin is a tad Moorish. It's true, it's just one hell of an understatement. Hess was a fanatical follower of Hitler's ideology, and unlike plenty of other Nazis, he wasn't in it for the glory or the power, but just because he believed. And through his belief and his devotion to Hitler, he became one of the most important figures in the Führer's rise. The silent Bob to Hitler's J, the Bert to his Ernie, Wait, is it just me? Or is Rudolf Hess actually the spitting image of Bert? Well, that's something I'm never going to be able to unsee. Anyway, despite literally trying to overthrow the government of their own country, Hitler and Hess were released from prison after serving less than a year behind bars. And around 10 years after that, Hitler achieved his ultimate goal of becoming the leader of the German Reich, this time through the slightly more mainstream method of actually getting people to vote for him. Within the year, his power in Germany was absolute. But despite having hit the big time, Hitler remembered his old friend Hess, repaying his enduring loyalty by honouring him with the title of Deputy Führer, and eventually going as far as to make Hess second in line to the leadership of the entire Nazi Party behind Hermann Göring, the supreme commander of the Luftwaffe. As for Hess, he couldn't have been happier. The man he viewed as something close to Germany's messiah was in power. The country he loved was back on the road to greatness after the shame of its defeat in the Great War, and Hess himself was right in the thick of it as one of Hitler's most trusted confidants. But as war descended across Europe in 1939, things began to change. Despite his military record, Hess's main duties weren't directly related to the war effort. And as Hitler became more and more distracted with blitzkrieg tactics and complex foreign policy, for the first time since 1920, Hess found himself on the outside of Hitler's inner circle, looking in. As the war progressed, he began to grow more and more worried. It wasn't so much that things were going badly, quite the opposite in fact. By the middle of 1940, Germany controlled much of Europe. Poland, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, half of France. But these early successes had gone to Hitler's head. The Germans and their allies were starting to get cocky. This growing sense of invincibility in the Nazi camp was one of the driving forces behind Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's plan to invade the Soviet Union. But Hess was concerned that taking on both the Allies and the Soviet Union, who up until now had largely stayed out of things, and in some cases actively worked with the Germans, was just asking for trouble. Hess felt that trying to fight against the British and the Soviets simultaneously would stretch German resources too thin. And so, whilst Hitler and his cronies were putting the finishing touches to their plans for Operation Barbarossa, Hess was finalizing a plan all of his own. One that no one, not even the Führer, ever saw coming. Hess's scheme was simple. He reasoned that if fighting on two fronts had the potential to be a military disaster, all he had to do was remove one of Germany's enemies from the equation. And so, Rudolf Hess was going to take the British out of World War II. On his own. But if you're picturing Bert from Sesame Street dressed in full Rambo regalia, storming the Houses of Parliament in search of Winston Churchill, you're a little wide of the mark. Hess didn't plan to defeat the British in battle. He was going to neutralize them at the negotiating table by suing for peace. And how exactly he attempted to do that is without a doubt one of the single weirdest things to have happened in the whole of the Second World War. Hess, an accomplished pilot, secretly had a Messerschmitt modified with long-range fuel tanks and several other updates to equip it for long-distance flying. He trained tirelessly in the aircraft for many months, focusing on his navigation skills and efficient flying techniques. And then, one night in the spring of 1941, as war raged across Europe and the German Luftwaffe prepared for a huge bombing raid on London, the Deputy Führer, second in line to the command of the entire Nazi Party, took off from an airfield in the south of Germany, all on his own, and set a course for Scotland. Now then, this is probably the part of the story where I should point out that Hess may have been a little bit mad. Rumour has it this whole wild scheme came to him in a dream, and he chose the date of his departure based on the advice of his astrologer, who had a good feeling about the alignment of a couple of planets and stuff. Apparently feeling he no longer had the Führer's trust, Hess planned this crazed mission entirely alone and without informing Nazi leadership, hoping to hand Hitler the keys to peace with Britain before anyone even realized he was missing. Still, mad or otherwise, Hess knew how to handle an aeroplane. He flew solo over largely unfamiliar terrain in foggy weather, and with only charts and maps for guidance, all whilst avoiding British air defences and more than one RAF squadron sent to intercept him. He flew much of the latter part of the journey at an altitude of just 15 metres in order to better avoid British fighter pilots. Hess's destination was Dungavel House, home of the Duke of Hamilton, whom Hess understood was keen on peace with Germany and had the power to help broker it. Hess never quite made it though. His masterclass in navigation and evasive flying didn't quite get him to his destination, because he ran out of fuel just 12 miles away, forcing him to bail out of his Messerschmitt and parachute to safety. A local man found him not too long after, still struggling to extricate himself from his chute